What event in your life f***ed you up mentally for the rest of your life? I came home one day, mind you. My mother had been abusive to me my whole life. She had a Grundig stereo and was playing Irish music very loud. After I called out a few times pretty loudly, no one answered, so I picked up the needle, which scratched the record, and she came out of her bedroom with my dad's gun and shot at me twice. I was 13 at the time and never went back home. Story 2. It wasn't even that long ago. My dad was always the idyllic standard of a strong person. At 6'5", and around 240 bhurps, he was hard to miss. But he was kind, charitable, memorable, and often unflappable. Even after the 1 in a million cancer diagnosis, he continued to be the same old guy. In between hospital visits with mesh screens for MREs and bouts of radiation, he never seemed to weaken. My parents had moved away from me in my hometown years before, so I didn't get to see Dad too often. The last time he came to my coast, I finally started to see the cracks forming. He couldn't walk very well and had bathroom issues. He was always way too free about telling me things like that. Classic Dad. The last time I saw him was back on his coast. I was able to have the joy of telling him that my now husband and I were engaged. But during that trip, I saw one of my heroes look truly weak. He insisted on trying to stand and walk as much as possible, despite his prognosis and weakened state. One day, several of us in the room helped him to stand, and he immediately fell backwards and said, "I'm dying." It truly broke my young heart, and still does to this day. Seeing someone you love and admire come to grips with mortality is almost indescribable. Dad's been gone for just over 3 years now, but that is a moment that I wish I could scrub from my mind. Story 3. My whole childhood was an event that messed up mentally for the rest of my life, but when I was 8, my little brother hung himself with his long sleeve on our bunk bed, and I walked in while he was purple and limp, with his eyes rolled back. I screamed, and my mom got him down, barely in time. I remember the paramedics holding me and calling me an angel as I was shaking so bad and crying. That's the only day I have a clear picture of every single detail. A few years later, at 16, we got adopted by separate families, and he hung himself in his closet. And this time, no one saved him. That was 10 years ago, and every single day, I honestly feel a part of me is dead, and I've never been the same since the first time. I can't look at ropes or people hanging in movies or people talking about stuff like that or suffocation or anything related. Severe like PTSD from when I was 8 and the news at 16. I have so much anger no one saved him, and so much anger we were separated and I couldn't save him again. Story 4. When I was in grade 11, it was the last day of school before summer, and I had some extra time. So I went to the nearby mall with some friends. On the way back, I just stepped onto the sidewalk after crossing the street when I heard a blood-curdling scream right behind me. I turned to see a woman had been run over by a flatbed truck and was between the front and rear tires under the drive shaft. She was still alive and calling for help. Blood leaked out of her, and there was a visible tire tread mark over her mid-back, which was squished flat as a pancake. She quickly faded and stopped moving or calling out just before the paramedics arrived. It was around then that I realized, had I been at that crosswalk 5 seconds later, I'd have been run over too. It was a surreal moment. Going back to school, I didn't know where else to go. I was in shock and just kind of wandered there as it was, a block away. Everyone else is cheering for the end of the school year, and I'm just white as a ghost, wandering around aimlessly in total shock. Probably had the 1,000-yard stare going too. I will say it for sure made me pay great attention when I cross any road. It has saved my life from stupid or crazy drivers more than a few times, so I guess I thank that poor lady for that intuition or instinct or whatever you want to call it. But I'm pretty sure I have some past over that event. I can see it very clearly in my mind when recalling this, right down to the wavy tread pattern on her back. I'll never forget that day. I'm not superstitious, but it was a Friday the 13th. For whatever it's worth. Story 5. Watching my wife after giving birth to our stillborn daughter, try to wake her up by rubbing her cheek and hands. Scream crying for hours for her to just wake up. You're young, you can try again. Probably the worst words said to us afterwards. A year and some later, a happy, healthy rainbow baby. But yeah, that messed me up good for a while and makes being the best parent I can be that much more rewarding. Edit. Thank you everyone for the upvotes and comments. I am truly sorry for everyone else that shared with the loss of a little and appreciate the openness. This can be a very hard subject for a lot of people. Just know you don't have to grieve alone or in silence, and it's okay to grieve. And remember how you see fit. Story 6. My mom had gotten married to her 4th husband by the time I was 11, all pretty crummy. They had some rough fights, where my mom would yell at me to call the cops. My stepdad would always say, "If you call the cops, I'm going to make going to jail worth it." It never stopped her from yelling, "Call the cops." But my sibling and I never did because they were both vicious when it came to fighting. So we were certain we would end up in the system after they both went to jail. After about 6 years of these fights, I wake up one morning to the usual struggle with glass breaking and screaming, but then I noticed it wasn't my mom screaming, "Call the cops." It was my stepdad. The neighbors heard his screams and they called. He ended up leaving that day with a police escort to the hospital. He has a metal plate in his face. They're still married over 10 years later, and after years of therapy, you would never know that they ever did such awful things to each other. But sometimes I look at him and that day plays in my head over and over. They really love each other and I don't think she meant to hurt him so badly. But it's crazy what we went through and what it had to take to get them to seek help. It's crazy what my brain tried to convince me was normal and not abuse. Story 7. Sexually trafficked by my 11 years older half-brother and his friends, passed around like a party-bottom top fluffer between the ages of 2 and 6. Every sexual act or perversion that could be done to a toddler, kid was done to me by adult men and teens. No memories of life before 10, just nightmares. When I finally entered puberty and got the video, talk, sex described to me, my brain released all the memories in sharp detail. Multiple attempts to kill myself between the ages of 5, where I remember standing at the top of the stairs when my brother was calling me to come down so he could abuse me. And my baby brain was like, if I throw myself down the stairs, maybe I won't have to do those things her makes me do. And then from 11 to adulthood, present-day intrusive thoughts, ideation, attempts. I told my mom when I was a sophomore in college at the urging of a roommate. She called me a liar. I moved abroad to finish school. He admitted to the rapes when I confronted him when I was 27, after having not seen him since I was 17. Mom said she went to him and he swore up and down it never happened. I cut off contact with her, told my other brother what had happened, and explained that's why I haven't visited more than 4 times in 40 years. It's hard not having a family. Everyone who was part of my family, thanks to Mom, thinks I'm mentally unstable. Story 8. Doing CPR on a Cambodian soldier when my interpreter tells me the soldier's brother, who's behind me with an AK-47, said that if I don't save his brother's life, he will shoot me. I could feel the muzzle of his rifle bumping into the back of my head each time I did chest compression. That threw me off a bit. Story 9. Being a nurse during the pandemic in NYC. Schmidt was so crazy that every time I told others, I didn't feel they understood the magnitude of the situation. I also didn't see my folks for 3 months. Family members couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones because no one could enter the hospital. Some people were fine and just dropped within hours. RIP to all those who lost their lives. Story 10. Long story short, military training, 60-80 kilometer long march in the mountain. Dumb wannabe survivalist instructor make us ration water. Me and my buddy got dehydration, 3 organ damaged, peeing blood, hallucinating, almost dead, or be a cripple. And May buddy that I thought was sleeping next to me while I was dying apparently wasn't sleeping. He was dead. Story 11. Work stress-induced burnout. My first job out of university, I was the wonder kid. Took it all on and did it all well. Worked ridiculous hours to impress higher-ups. Ended up depressed, suicidal, and unemployable alcoholic. Will never fully recover, unfortunately. The psychological damage is done. Story 12. 2 friends of mine that were dating approached me to tell me that another mutual friend thought I was cute and wanted us all to hang out. I was down. I had previously crushed on him years before, and we even went to a high school dance together. So we were all hanging out for a few weeks. Me and him were hooking up and talking about being together. When we weren't together for those 2 weeks, we were talking on the phone or texting nonstop. Then he tells me he's actually in a relationship, and his GF had been out of the country, and she was coming home, so we needed to stop seeing each other. I was so upset, but I really didn't want any freaking drama. So I agreed and promised I would act like nothing happened. A few months go by and I wake up to my phone being blown up by dude's GF. She's freaking the f*** out on me, calling me everything terrible. And I was just letting her get it all out. I tried explaining to her how he lied to both of us, but it didn't matter. The 2 original friends that set us up were now on her side, and everyone ended up hating me over it all. Story 13. Watching my dad beat my mom and beating me for a period of time. Hasn't done it since then, and it's been 30 years. Watching my friends get killed in war. Watching people die throughout life. This whole political Schmidt show. Since the early 2000s. My brother putting a bullet in his head. My girlfriend of 5 years, verbally drunk, abusing me. I'm peachy. Story 14. At 17, I refused to sign my mom's contract of rules. She called the police on me and had me arrested in our front yard, barefoot, in the middle of a summer afternoon in front of all of our neighbors. Then I was taken to the county jail, where I was held until juvenile services arrived around midnight to transport me 3 hours to the Juvenile detention center. Upon arrival, I was interrogated for being barefoot and treated like an extreme criminal. After what felt like hours of being checked in to the facility, I was finally able to lay down and try to sleep. But for only about 30 minutes, that next day was horrific. I was sleep deprived, scared, unsure of what was happening to me next. After 48 hours, I needed to be seen by a judge. So I was then transported back to my county, Still barefoot BTW, where I appeared in court. My parents were there and I was released to them. The judge placed me on house arrest for the remainder of the summer and formal probation for 1 year. My mother seemed remorseful for calling the police on me, but told me that she requested house arrest for me. During my probation year, I decided not to come home after school one day and hang out with friends instead. Well, my mom turned me in again for violating my probation, and that landed me right back in the courtroom. By this time, I was 18, and the family court judge was over my bullshit case. My probation was revoked, and I was sentenced to 5 days in county jail. After school let out for summer. I'm 32 now and just processing this period of my life. IDK, what to think of this? Story 15. I would occasionally help my dad at his office if his secretary wasn't going to be there, because I knew how to do everything, and it is a very specialized field. He and my grandpa had the business, and Gramps was older and not in the office much. Dad had the only computer with a good internet connection, so I was in there when I decided to check the browser history, which was a big mistake. Found out my dad was bi and had been cheating on my mom for years. Found a box of sex toys too, but decided I would just shut the heck up and act like I saw nothing. Came home a few weeks later to my mom crying. Apparently my dad had gone to an AIA convention, but when mom called, she heard a woman and kids in the car, and when she called back, he didn't answer. So he came back when everyone was gone and got his stuff and moved 2 hours away with his app. I wound up showing my mom what I had found. I was so pissed at my dad. So mad. I had matched dates on the computer with big life milestones of mine. Saw he was hooking up with a married couple while we were on a recruiting trip back east. He had left their hotel for a few hours to get food. I remember my mom calling to see if he had come by the school to bring me something. It just made me more angry, so I refused to speak to him. Then I heard a while later he was saying he had some medical condition and wanted to talk as my bros were still in contact. I just thought it was bullshit to get sympathy. Then I got the call that he died at 52. It was so sudden I didn't really process it right away. I didn't know how until it dawned on me how good of a dad he was. This man quite literally devoted his entire life to us, apart from his exploits the last few years. He would work 8 to 5 and then would come home long enough to grab the basketballs or cones, and would take myself and my brothers to our sports practice, where he would coach one of our teams. He even helped bring a new basketball league that was much better than the Schmitty City program, where you could pay extra to be on the team of your choice. Weekends were always someone's tournament out of town that required team drinks and hotel rooms. Never once complained or took a day off, didn't hold it over our heads or make a fuss. For years and years, he sacrificed his entire life to our family and making us happy. And I couldn't see past what he had done. He put up with all my failures and shortcomings and never put me down or backed out. And he made one mistake and I could not see past my anger to even speak with him. He passed from a blood clot going to his lungs for the 3rd time. And we found out that he had stopped taking his blood thinners, that he wanted to die. So anyone who may be going through something similar, do not follow my lead. Look at the macro and take in the big picture. Find a way to forgive, if there is one. I have taken that situation and learned from it, became better because of it. But I haven't forgiven myself, nor will, because there are some things you cannot undo. You cannot take back. There is no way to earn forgiveness when there is no one to ask it from. The only thing predictable about life is its unpredictability. Story 16. In Sept of last year, my now ex-boyfriend of 9 months. But we had been friends for over 15 years, ran me over with his truck. It was a F-150. I rolled under the truck twice. Then a tire went over my chest. I remember everything, every single thing, every break, crack, noises my body was making, etc. I got up and was scalped, touched my skull. Do not recommend BTW. All my ribs were crushed. I was dying. It was 3:30 in the morning. I had to walk around holding my scalp on my head to find my phone. I called my sister, told her I was dying and that I had already called 911. I had not, but I wanted her to get my child and hers, who were asleep inside before I died, and they found me in my driveway the next morning, called 911, passed out in the ambulance, begging them not to let me die. BC, I have a then 6-year-old daughter. Woke up a couple weeks later, paralyzed. Apparently, I fought tubes and all yanked so many out, they had to paralyze me. They had to prone me, keep flipping me over and over every 8 hours apparently, to get my lungs to work. Called the fam in when I sighted when they were plated my ribs, but got me back. Called them in 2 more times to pull the vent plug, but fam didn't and wouldn't. I'm here and alive, after 37-ish broken bones. All my ribs, but 13 in my back, broken hip, shoulder blade, jaw, etc. Shredded lungs and diaphragm. I was so confused and scared when I woke up. Reality and dream state were so mixed. I could hear people talking, I just couldn't move. It was rough to say the least. Had to learn to walk, talk, eat, drink, and wipe my ass all over again. You would think that was the worst part. The worst part is the fallout afterwards. Lost custody, my home, my income, other than the little disability I get. And like I'm slowly losing my soul little by little. I hope to be able to work next year. I have a great family and loved ones. But this has been the most terrible I've ever been mentally and clearly physically. Court in 3 days for the guy that did it. Might get a couple years. It was intentional. I have it on my security cameras, but he was under influence and had mental health issues. Apologies if I don't make much sense, BC. I started rambling. Thanks for listening. Story 17. I was driving down the highway about 10 p.m. and about 2 miles from home. There was hardly any traffic. 2 cars about 1-2, 3 each 4 mile ahead and through all the traffic lights. There were 2 lights until my turn to home. I was trying to find the air vent slider from hot to cold with my right hand. I wasn't looking and kept feeling, and for 30 seconds, I fumbled, not knowing why I couldn't find it. I glanced with my eyes for 1 second to see where it was, and then back to the road. In sheer terror, I slammed on the brakes as there were about 3 to 4 cars stopped at the light in front of me that were not there a second ago. The road was clear for almost 2 miles, and both lights were green. Now, the light was red and cars from nowhere were stopped still. As I looked back up and saw the cars, there was no reaction time. Bees, seeing the hood of my vehicle hitting the trunk of the stopped car. I closed my eyes, gripped the steering wheel and said, "God, please don't let me kill anyone else," and waited for the impact that never came. Everything was silent, and I wondered if this is what death was like, black and silent. I began to hear a noise, and as it faded into my hearing, I could tell it was the sound of traffic. I slowly opened my eyes, still gripping the steering wheel with white hands from no blood. I saw I had teleported into the median of the road and was just sitting there with a couple cars passing by. I was stunned, disoriented, and confused as to what happened. I did not fall asleep, I don't drink or do drugs, and have perfect recall of everything until my eyes closed. The cars appeared from nowhere. I saw me hitting a car, but no impact. Seconds later, I'm 1 or 2 miles down the road in the median. I was a mess for a while. Then often over the years and still shaking recalling it now. I pass that spot almost daily, and if I think about it, I become bedridden and useless. I've finally considered moving after 10 years of this, so I don't have to see that spot and relive it every day. Story 18. I was 16, and it was Christmas Eve. My auntie went to bed, and her boyfriend in his 20s stayed up with me. We all had a great relationship. They bought me alcohol. I got drunk. It was easy back then. I was a child. We were chatting and I asked whether he had ever cheated on my aunt. He said, "Yeah, with a girl in Italy." He then asked if he could kiss me. I nodded. I didn't really understand or realize I could say no, so we kissed. This carried on for a few months. I was having big family issues and couldn't go home to my abusive grandparents. I was staying with my aunt. I felt like I couldn't say no. If I did, I'd be homeless. He'd kiss me when he could and come home early to spend time with me. There was a night where he came back home early from pool and he wanted to have sex. I said no, profusely. He said, "Well, why are you here then?" And so I packed my Schmidt and left to my then boyfriend. No one found out about the girl in Italy until I told my auntie's friend that he said he cheated on her. I asked her not to tell my aunt and that I'd do it myself. She naturally told my aunt and my aunt didn't believe it, said I was a liar, ruined our whole relationship. The worst part is, even if he lied about the Italy girl, he still did those things with me. He's never admitted it. I've been treated like a black sheep since. She will have nothing to do with me, which makes me think, she knows what happened and feels guilty for not protecting me. You don't ignore and hate someone for over 15 years for something like that. I know what I did was wrong. I'm 33 now and I did not understand things as I do now. I'd been groomed by older men for years. I thought it was normal. I didn't understand loyalty or rights and wrongs. I'd never been taught and witnessed abuse and been through a lot of abuse. It's my biggest regret. Story 19. I think I'm going through one right now. I left an abusive ex. He is disabled from being in the army. I was a SAW to take care of him for 12 years while his abusiveness increased. Now, since I have no work history for the last 15 years, I can't find a job. Phone is shut off, so I don't have a nakqualish if I wanted to apply. Don't have a car. My health was neglected and I tried to catch up. We are still technically married and he's getting VASSID for being married with a dependent. He told me it's been long enough and to file divorce papers already, then withdrew all financial support, closed the bank accounts, and disappeared. I have no money to get to doc apps and haven't been able to pay for RX since January. I don't qualify for disability because you have to show you worked at least 5 years out of the last 10, which I haven't because I was taking care of him. I'm destitute, living with my grown son who hasn't been able to find a job. We might lose electricity on Monday and be homeless next month. I would never go back, but I can see how so many women are forced to stay with their abusers. But this has definitely changed me mentally. I thought I was escaping to some semblance of safety, and late-in-life happiness. But he pulled everything out from under me before I could plant my feet, and I'm drowning, and I feel like I'm still being punished for leaving. Ida, you guys are amazing. So many helpful suggestions. I will look into what I can, but many of the things need a working phone number to apply, or the ability to get to their offices. So right now it's the obstacle of getting my phone turned back on and buying a bus pass, but I'm trying my hardest to get it. Wish me luck. Story 20. Physically disciplining your kids is a pretty common phenomenon in India. Unfortunately, it has been normalized and doesn't come across as a big deal because almost everyone you know has gotten spanked, slapped, beaten by their parents in the name of teaching them right from wrong or disciplining. Just recently, I came to the realization in my late 20s that I must have been only 6-7 years old in the peak of my getting physically disciplined era, and recognizing how little I was makes me sad. In the 1st and 2nd grade, my mom would sit me down for hours trying to get me to do schoolwork, homework, memorizing whatever was taught, prep tests, etc. And if I messed up, I would get slapped on my face, arm, back, basically the first place she could access. I have a vivid memory of being smacked by a long wooden ruler once so hard that it broke into 2 halves. And if I started to cry at any point, she would hit me more and yell at me to stop crying. Quiet, absolutely quiet. So I had to learn to hold my tears back and harden myself to not show those emotions of being hurt. And 20 years down the line, I find it hard to cry in front of people I love. It's weird because I can cry in front of strangers easily compared to someone I know who loves me and cares for me. Another weird, complex aspect of it was that I knew she loved me because outside of this, she was a doting, extremely caring and involved mother. In fact, she would feel so bad after hitting me. She would also tend to my bruises, hand imprints, from slaps with ointments, etc. after she was done disciplining me. Also, here's an example of the complex behavior. If I were to fall and get hurt, she would yell at me or smack me first for not being careful and then proceed to nurse my wound. My mom finally realized that her ways were wrong and stopped any physical form of disciplining by the time I went to 4th grade. But I realized those 2-ish years of getting beaten up have messed me up in many ways. She feels extremely guilty and still apologies for it from time to time, and we have a great relationship now. But some days I think about it and have a hard time shaking the not-so-good feelings off. Child.dr. I got physically disciplined big time by Indian mom around the age of 6-7. Story 21. Lots. The girl I loved when I was 19 died in a high-speed chase the night I was too stressed to let her stay over, even though I knew she needed help. Getting my best friend the dope he relapsed and overdosed on. The people I saw getting stabbed or raped in East Van when I was 11 playing her nurse for my mom when she'd fall and bust her head open and I was the only one at home with her and had to make the call between calling 911 and getting her proper help, but be taken by CPS or treating her myself and hoping she'd be okay. By my older brother when I was 11. Going 6 days without sleep and detox. Ensing in the 2-day psychosis episode, that was so bad, I sometimes think it's still happening. When I wake up from 2 vivid of dreams, any or all of those. The Schmidt with my mom or my brother were probably the worst in terms of me up, because I was young, so they were probably the most formative. The girl dying left me with the most guilt because I loved her and knew she needed help, even though with helping my friend relapse, I pretty much directly killed him. But we were addicts, and he would have done it with or without me. The violence in East Van was the most vivid and visceral as a memory, but I was high and mostly numb to it. As an adult, the psychosis was probably the worst thing I ever actually experienced, and the one thing that didn't help me grow in some way, and still bugging me to this day. It was just absolute, pure, abject terror. And while I'm not suicidal, the mornings I wake up in those first moments where I believe I'm still trapped there, I genuinely want to kill myself until I start to feel reality again. I'm happy, healthy, and sober now, for what it's worth, and probably more self-aware and mentally healthy than most people. Story 22. I could write a book, so I'm gonna just go with one of the worst things me and my brother lived with our parents at the time. They were abusive as it was, towards us and each other. She was pregnant and one day they were just arguing. And the next thing I know, he slammed her on the ground and was strangling her. We were scared to death. I was maybe 10. We luckily lived right next door to a family member's house and went there and got them and they separated them. Can't remember a whole lot. They both ended up in jail for a bit. Don't remember them getting arrested after getting my family members next door. The next thing I remember was my G-mate picking us up and like I said, she was pregnant. My brother was born, but died from lack of oxygen, I think it was. Which I don't even want to get into, how I found out about that. I'm already crying. I have a memorial tattoo for him now. Story 23. My 16th birthday, the girl I had been dating for a year, and 3 of her friends called me around lunch to wish me happy birthday and sing happy birthday to me. She said they were about to leave their house and come to mine to pick me up. I live in small town Mississippi, so nothing is close. She lives on the opposite side of the county, so it's a solid 15-mile drive. There was no cell phones then and no way of knowing where someone was. 2 hours goes by and they still aren't there. I had called her house multiple times because now I am worried. Caller ID had just came out, and we had the little box that did tell you the number and name of the person calling. The phone rings and it says, North Mississippi Emergency Services. I pick it up and it's her dad. He explains to me that they had a bad wreck and she was in the hospital in Tupelo, and I needed to come up there. He informed me that both of her legs were broken and her back, but she was alive. I thought, okay, that's bad, but after a while she may be able to walk again. We will just somehow get through this. I had a little 85 Mazda RX-7 at the time, and IDK, how it didn't blow up as fast as I drove to the hospital. As soon as I walked into the hospital, I heard her dad scream my name, and I immediately knew it was over. I have never in my life at the time heard a grown man cry like this. Walked into the room, and it was absolutely terrible. He did not inform me that, yes, she was alive, but the only reason she was alive is because of a machine. I sat in on family meetings with the DRs, and they said there is nothing they can do due to trauma to the brain. The decision was made to take her off the machine that night and donate organs. I got to hold her hand and feel the life leave her. I'm 47 now and have been married 27 years, but still think about her. My wife had a liver transplant about a year before we met, so she was big into the organ donation scene. Because of that, I got to meet the lady who received my girlfriend's heart and feel it beat again. It was probably the strangest feeling of emotions I have ever experienced. Sorry for the book. Story 24. 24 me. For the last 3 to 4 years, I've been taking care of my parents, health, financially, an aunt that lived with us all my life who has stage 4 lung cancer. I've had to stop my education to come home and help my family in different ways, which was hard in itself, BC. I did want to pursue my education and pay them back for the effort they put in as a loving family. Very blessed, and I easily acknowledge that. Last July in my kitchen, my father fell over as I was about to sleep for work. I'll never forget my mother yelling for me and me sprinting to the room to find him on the floor with his eyes curling over and body turning cold. I called 911 and was doing CPR until the cops arrived. I was CPR certified and did everything I was trained I was looking right at him while he was passing. He passed before the cops arrived, and when they did, they shocked him. And I didn't leave the room, okay? I was convinced I did enough to help save him. I watched his body that I already tried to save jerk several times because of the shock, but no sign of life after. These last years changed my outlook on life. I know I'm young and should try to work toward my future, but I've been so focused on helping elsewhere that I gave up on myself. And the events of the death are burned into my mind. It's been brought all to move on. I work full-time and have been working towards becoming a nurse at my community college, which is known to be a good program in my state, but nothing takes me away from that event and the general last few years. Story 25. Years ago, when I was about 19, I threw a huge kick-ass Halloween party. I lived on a large enough piece of land to host well over 100 plus people. Multiple bonfires, kegs, the whole deal. Had acres of land to have fun with, but towards the back of the property was an old decrepit treehouse that was just an accident waiting to happen. Nails sticking out of uneven and rotted wood made it a point to everyone there to stay away from it. Towards the end of the night, early morning, I was gathering stragglers, and my girlfriend wanted to watch the sunrise. I told her I'd meet her on the east side of the property after I got a friend settled. 5 minutes later, I find her asleep on the south end of the property. It had been a long day, so I assumed she just dozed off waiting for the sun. With the help of a friend, I move her inside to the couch, and we all go to sleep. When I woke in the morning, she was dead next to me. It became clear that she had fell from the treehouse, about 30 feet, lacerated her liver, and was bleeding in the brain. I have never forgiven myself for carrying her internally bleeding body and sleeping next to it when I should have gotten her help. We didn't know what had happened until we found her phone at the top edge of the treehouse. I was later told that even if I had seen her fall, her injuries would have likely been fatal anyways. Still, I'm a shell since then and have a fear of getting close to anyone intimately. Story 26. I didn't know it wasn't normal till I was older. As a child, I remember my playroom. Like, my room as a kid was great, had a TV. My mom put tapes on for me, had a big TV, lots of toys and art stuff. Big bed was great, even had a little square cut out of the door. I could jump up and scream out, "Hey, Mom, put cartoons on," or "Hey, I'm hungry." It was, wait, you guys were not locked in your playroom till you were 8 or 9? Huh? I mean, I came out for dinner, or if we had family over, no biggie, right? I mean, yeah, I went to school. I think I remember coming out for Christmas and birthdays. But yeah, other than that, I was locked in a room with not much contact with the outside world. Was better once my little brother was born, because then I had a friend, well, kind of they came and end get him after a few hours of toys and cartoons. Then I was alone again, but I mean, I was fine. I colored on walls, played with Legos, watched movies and stuff. It was fine. It wasn't like my stepfather would smack the F out of me sometimes for no reason. Just leave, dads. Am I right, guys? Yeah, fun stuff my mom didn't make sure the stuff I was watching was overly specific either. Lots of Power Rangers, lots of cartoons like Captain Planet, Darkwing Duck, Rescue Rangers, Ghostbusters, good guys fighting evil on none. Stop repeats in all forms. Mystic Knights, AVR Troopers, Temenect. Nothing to give me a hero complex or spend decades daydreaming of being a hero. Or nothing leading to thinking my life is here to be a hero who saves someone in sacrifice of myself. Leading to multiple near-death incidents. It was fine, no big deal, was a great childhood startup, right? I'm fine, I'm good. I don't self-isolate it at all. I'm good. Story 27, watching my big brother and dad fight and my dad having to get a metal plate put into his face, going to see my big brother's body at the hospital, just to go up from the basement to the top floor, to see my grandfather who fell going to the hospital to identify my brother, who ripped his liver and smashed his face all up. At that moment when I visited him, he told me I had a choice to do what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, regardless of the consequences, and I would have to pay a price like my brother did. My little sister being born, not able to walk or talk and never will be able to, holding my father as he passed away from stage 4 cancer, after being diagnosed only for 3 months. Me trying to give him CPR till the ambulance came. My mom leaving when I was 16 and still on her own mission to this day. My parents both being on drugs my whole life. Growing up without actual parental figures pushing me forward. Most of my family and friends I supported at a very young age, and they used me. Growing up in really bad neighborhoods, fighting, seeing people get chopped up, shot, cut, killed, being let down by almost every person I ever let close to me one way or another. And then never having the support I give come back around, being cheated on in almost every relationship I've ever been in. And now just the loneliness. It's so hard for me to trust or open up, and when I do, people always take it the wrong way or don't know what to say, because that's just the tip of the iceberg of what I have been through. Story 28. I was predisposed to not dealing with trauma in a functional manner because my mom had terrible mental health and narcissistic personality disorder. The event that broke me completely was when I worked in healthcare. I cared for a person who asked for his ventilator to be disconnected. He had a very high spinal injury but was completely lucid and psychologically intact. I cared for him consistently for 6 months, as other nurses treated him just horribly. I read him the newspaper, we talked about music, and often ate lunch together. We became friends, which was my fault, and I should have seen it happening. He asked to donate his organs after death, non-heart-beating donation. The day of his death, he asked me to not leave him alone when he went down to donate. I thought at the time that this was the right thing to do. I watched the surgeons basically cut up the dead body of one of my friends. Within 3 weeks, I was using opiates daily and became addicted. The nursing profession turned their back on me and forced me out of a 13-year career because I, in their words, was a person unbecoming to hold the title of nurse. I eventually became homeless after my partner left me with our 2-year-old. I lost everything. I'm doing better today. I went to rehab, started in a different job, supporting people through homelessness and addiction. I see my daughter all the time and have an amazing partner who knows everything. Story 29. Parents divorce. They were together 17 years of my life, now split for 4. I grew up a daddy's girl. My dad could do no wrong. But then I found the real dad that my judgment was clouding. Dad cheated, lied to my face when I was asked if it was because of her, and told me that it was a mutual agreement. Next day, my mom subtly told me I was correct. He'd get upset with me for littlest things. For example, he'd get upset if I was busy doing my homework instead of hanging out with him, if I wanted nothing to do with his GF, that kind of stuff. I learned of the names he'd call my mom when they got into an argument. I didn't want them in the same room together because they couldn't be civil unless I asked them to be. I went from, oh, I want to tell dad every little thing that happens in my life, to, ugh, dad's calling, within a matter of around 3 months. It's gotten better, I will admit, but seeing him goof around and stuff with his now fiance the way he would with my mom definitely hurts. Story 30. My mom had this problem where she had to take daily pills, otherwise she would not be able to keep anything down. I'm talking food, water, medicine, anything that she consumed, she would vomit up. So when she took the second COVID vaccine, it made her really sick, and she was so nauseous she couldn't take her meds. She went to the doctor, but they gave her nausea pills instead of taking her to the hospital. She can't take pills. One day I was eating chocolate chip pancakes, having a good time, until my dad said that my mom was dead. I was like, hey, yeah, sure she is. Because my dad used to have a sense of humor where he would say stupid stuff that clearly isn't true. But when the police got called and they confirmed her death, I sobbed so hard. My mom was dead. She had so much time ahead of her. Her parents outlived her, all because of medical malpractice. I hate them. I'll never forgive them. Story 31. 1. My partner of 4 years, who I would have trusted with my life without hesitation, cheating on me and telling me he only stayed for money, and because he felt pity for me for about 2 years already. Also, explained to me that in contrary to every single time he reassured me I was pretty in his eyes, he actually found me disgusting and unattractive since I had gained some weight. I was just broken. I can't trust my intuition anymore since that day. My emotional connection to every human being has become so much more difficult because I can't rely on my feelings about them, e.g. intuitively feeling like someone's a nice person. Also, I can't trust men. I try really hard, but in the end I do start questioning things in my head. Sadly, I have also lost every confidence in my looks again. I honestly think I am ugly and unattractive. 2. Years and years of bullying. And then that one time being told, yeah, you're difficult, so no wonder your classmates don't get along with you, by a teacher. It fucked me up so bad. I always feel like a burden to people because of this. And also because ADHD does make you one sometimes. But I'm overly aware of it and have thought of deleting myself due to this. Not currently, don't worry. Although today I know that what he said was definitely not okay, and the bullying wasn't my fault. It broke something inside of me. Story 32. Seeing my dad decide to stop fighting his cancer and slowly starve to death was pretty shocking. He was always a vibrant, strong, healthy man. Watching him become a corpse was pretty horrendous. I smoke a lot of weed now. Story 33. When I was about 7 and 8 years old, I had made a new friend from school and went to a sleepover at her house. Her grandma told us to shower and I said I could go first, and she insisted we do it together so it would go by faster, and I didn't care, because I have a sister, so it was normal at that age. She touched every part of my body and was admiring how I looked. A girl, the same age as me, molested me, and I didn't understand what had happened at the time. All I knew was it just didn't feel right. We went to sleep in her bed, and I stared at the ceiling the entire time until it was exactly 5 a.m., because that's when the sun would be up. I ran home and never talked to her again. I didn't tell anybody what she did to me until I learned exactly what it was. I didn't tell my parents till I was like in my 20s, when I first attempted to end my life. I have 2 girls, one with autism, and she's nonverbal. My biggest fear is for them to go through something similar, because I had to learn at a young age. You can't trust anybody. I know this was long, and anybody who read my comment, thank you. Story 34. When I was young, I was molested by a coach of mine, but I hid it from everyone. About 5 years later, there was a shooting at my high school by a freshman where 2 people died and others were shot. The last adult to see that kid before the shooting was the coach, apparently dating the shooter's best friend's mom, but of course, I suspected. The coach found my number 2 or so years after that, and out of morbid curiosity, I met with him for lunch. When I asked about the shooter and all that he described the fun outings he would take the boys on and all this schmidt, and I knew and still said nothing. Then 10 years later, I was Googling his name and sex crimes in the area and found nothing. Then I remembered he was from Tulsa, so I searched his name and crimes in Tulsa and found out he was serving 40 years to life for forcing 2 teen boys to have sex at gunpoint. And then in my high school Facebook group, someone linked an interview with the school shooter where he named the coach as someone who molested him and encouraged him to stand up to people. And honestly, I could have just told my parents and the cops before all that awful schmidt happened. So that sucks for me sometimes. Story 35. It's weird, but like others, I watched my stepdad get completely consumed by cancer, and quickly. He was extremely abusive growing up, but I would have never wished on him what happened to him. He was horrifically disfigured by the time he passed. It was like a horror movie. He had a tumor in his neck that quickly grew and broke the skin, leaving him incapable of speech and left half his face paralyzed. Then he started treatment and it started destroying that tumor, leaving a hole, exposing his jawbone. It leaked. It stunk. I guess it metastasized at some point, and he woke up unable to stand one day and became paralyzed when they removed that tumor. Despite treatment, he had a tumor wrap around his organs and his brain. One day I came to take him to treatment, and he was smoking a cigarette. I knew he threw in the towel. By the time he passed, a bunch of mini tumors had grown around his neck wound, and a bunch of black moles popped up on his body. There were a couple other things that I won't mention involving his genitals. It's been 10 years, and I am still in shock from it. It's very conflicting, too. I still wish he hadn't had to go through that. Story 36. When I had to clean and change the bandages covering my mother's cancer tumors that were growing out of her back. Every day, I'd get my face and hands covered in blood. There was one time when the bleeding wouldn't stop, and my mother had to be in an incredibly uncomfortable and painful position with all the weight of her tumors pressing on her organs and nerves. And I was there holding her up physically with one leg pressed against her back. I was right there, supporting her entire weight, almost 300 pounds, on my one leg while holding the bandages over her tumors, trying to stop her bleeding. This went on for 47 minutes. My mother did a great deal to not show her pain to us, so we never even saw her complain once about her pain or condition. But in those 47 minutes, she broke down in front of me, howling for God to come save her, asking why me, over and over. I saw my greatest joy in life, completely and utterly reduced to a sobbing mess. I've never heard such conviction and confusion in a person's voice. That was the one and only time she broke down, and I don't think I'll ever forget her screams, "Love you to bits, Mama." Story 37. My mom's bout with dementia is something I really don't think I can ever get over. She was an English major in college, into the 80s punk scene. She could paint these beautiful works of art, read more books than could fit in the Library of Alexandria. She was truly my best friend, and I did everything with her. I went over one morning to give her medicine, and on my way, I received a call that she walked down to our local deli to casually explain that my pops wasn't waking up. Found him face down in his bedroom, and I was her primary caretaker now at 22-23. I was sad and frustrated, not with her, but the inevitable. This is the woman who taught me how to use a spoon, and I've now assumed the role of parent in a twist of fate. My mom has since passed along with the rest of my immediate family over the span of 2015-2019. Felt like the world had it out for me, and I'm only now getting around to trying to fix myself. I get this gut-wrenching feeling at the thought of living more of my life without her than I did with her. A forever work in progress. Story 38. Mom met a dude from Egypt on Facebook, moved us there, and married him when I was 11. He turned out to be abusive and wouldn't let us leave the apartment. Mom gave me our passports to hide, and I stuffed them underneath my mattress. He ripped apart the wardrobe in my room while searching for them. Luckily, he never found the passports. He would come in my room and rip out the dial-up router from my laptop. All I did at the time was play online, since I had nothing else. When they'd have bad fights, so my mom wouldn't be able to purchase tickets back home. We packed up everything one afternoon while he was at work and went back to America. I basically spent 6 months stuck in a room in Egypt with nothing to do other than play on my laptop and listen to them beat the Schmidt out of each other. After we got back to America, I became a depressed recluse with social anxiety when I was a carefree, outgoing child beforehand. Schmidt sucked. Story 39. This one feels a bit sillier in comparison to some of the others in this thread, but here we go. When I was in 8th grade, a boy passed me a note in 2nd period that said, "You have big jugs." I looked at him, and a group of 4 or 5 boys were staring at my chest. I was a 36D by age 14, and giggling. I didn't know what to do, so I wrote back, "Gee, thanks," and went back to taking notes on the PowerPoint or whatever. I don't think those stupid boys will ever understand how that note changed the ways that I see myself and the world around me. I doubt they even remember doing it. I stopped wearing certain types of clothes, JCPenney V-necks and clothes in my size, God forbid, in favor of crew neck and baggier clothes. I changed my posture to hunch forward and hide my chest. I had an unnecessary cosmetic surgery at the end of my 9th grade year. Even now, 15 years later, I struggle with wearing clothes that actually fit me properly, and my posture is never not giving Quasimodo after years of feeling ashamed to exist within my body. Story 40. I got assaulted while asleep in my tent, then lost my house in a flood, had my car broken into while I was sleeping in it, bad breakup, sprained my ankle, then had my car stolen all within the time of 5 months. I was severely suicidal for a long time after that, but I got help. I still have a lot of problems with sleeping and general anxiety. Story 41. 2009. I unloaded an M16 into the front of a pickup truck. I killed the driver. The truck exploded anyway, but at least it did it over there instead of inside the outpost. I know I saved lives. For those of you that don't know, a lot of terrorists are just as much victims. The real terrorists will scoop up an entire family, tie them up, then lock them in a room for a few days. Then they come back, grab the oldest male, and go, "Either you die today doing what we say, or you watch us kill your family, then we kill you anyways." Then they end up with their hands tied to a steering wheel, driving a bomb at something. Story 42. Many events in my childhood and adult life. I was 11 age, and first time saw my dad died at funeral without say goodbye. After that, my cousin did sexual abuse abuse on me for a few years and started smoke at 11 age without let everyone know. Escaped from first foster parents after they called me dumbass and gross tomboy. Was homeless for around a week until the police found me and sent me to airport. Then new foster home. Later years getting worse. Rapes. I lost some people I trust and care for them. Still do drugs and stopped contacts with my family because they are also into drugs and abuse on me. But now as adult, my new life getting better thanks to my friend helped me stay with her home after I was homeless again after my first roommate kicked me out without a reason during COVID in March. Story 43. During 2009-2010, my father and grandmother, mama's mother, died consecutively. 2009, my father died literally by my side. I was doing a routine massage to him because his body was always aching due to the complications of diabetes. I was barely 12 that time. 2010, my grandma died while we were both on a vacation to the province. That day, we were at the beach with grandma's siblings when she suddenly acted weird, like she was drowning. When she had gone through the low parts of the beach, I didn't know. She was already going through a cardiac arrest. I wasn't able to respond to her immediately. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, but she died in the ER. I was barely 13 that time. All they did was to blame me for what had happened to her. Her siblings blamed me every time they see me. They are angry to me because of what happened. Those are the things that messed up my mentally, that I always go from 0 to 100 when someone blames me for things without proving it first. Story 44. Testifying in court after being sexually assaulted. Cross-exam specifically. I wish I never reported it. It ruined my life. He was convicted, also, on 8 other victims counts over decades, and I was threatened and lost a lot of friends. I had reported it in 2012. They warned him. He gave an interview admitting it, told him not to do it again. He did in 2015, and I ended up being subpoenaed because of that report. I didn't want to go to court. I found out after that he had a history of not keeping his hands to himself. He was in a position of authority with a lot of cash and public trust. I learned that nobody cares about the victims and got absolutely nothing out of reporting it. Had he been acquitted, I probably would have ended up hurting myself or even attempting suicide. Story 45. I just started high school and was a very shy kid. I decided to try and participate in school sport events during lunch, and the first time I went, a kid came to me and said, "We're full, you can't come and play with the others, just go do some other schmidt." It was one of the cool kids, and they were already in a group full of friends from their previous school, while I was the only one from my school who made it in this program. For smart kids, I don't know what it's called in English. This is what triggered my social anxiety, and I still struggle socially 30 years later. Story 46. I'm a medical professional, worked in trauma for 20 years. I called my own father's death. He had bad Parkinson's and refused to move in with anyone. We had multiple family meetings, and I said, every time, if he isn't with someone one day, he's gonna fall. He's gonna get a head bleed and he's gonna die. Well, sure enough, he fell, laid there for 8 hours till someone found him. I was the medical power of attorney. He had bilateral temporal lobe. Head bleeds. There was no option. Just had to keep him comfortable till he passed. He could respond by squeezing hands. He knew we were there. I asked him to say anything. His last word to me was pain. After he died, I gave up. I've helped save countless strangers and couldn't help someone I loved. I mentally quit the medical field that day. Story 47. The death of my dad. When I was 6, he got in a motorcycle crash when an old man ran a stop sign and sent my dad flying headfirst into a telephone pole. My dad was considered to be a vegetable, which my mom denies to this day, until he died 3 years later when I was 9. I was a pretty normal kid until then. After that, I shut down and became painfully shy and backward, which I still am to a degree. Making friends was very difficult, and trying to date girls was nearly impossible. Pharmaceuticals has helped some, and I've learned a public face, which helps with jobs. I still have anxiety and paralyzing shyness with romantic-type situations or crowds. Story 48. My mother refusing the meat, my children, her first grandkids, because my wife is half Mexican and disowned me and my girls. A year and a half later, after not having had any sort of contact with her, she hears my sister talking on the phone with me and begins cussing her out and saying the worst things about me to her. And what fucked me up after working through all the other B's was hearing her saying I was the worst meffer that ever lived. My mother was and is an abusive, narcissistic, evil woman. And I grew up hearing the worst things, but that for whatever reason really messed me up. For context, my mother is biracial and grew up dealing with racism, so her discriminating another biracial individual is just wild. Story 49. Being raped 2 times in the span of like 1 to 2 weeks by my neighbors while I was studying abroad, and my roommates, assuming that I was a whore and that I asked for it. They gave me a slut alter ego called Crystal. I hate hearing that name now. And then, years later, after I've more or less healed from that, my BF of a year and a half sexually assaulted me in my sleep. So yeah, I know good guys exist, but I think I just want to spend the rest of my life alone. Friends and family is enough for me. Story 50. When cops came into my home, without knocking, grabbed me from behind and beat the tar out of me. Then they lied on the report and said they knocked. I meet them at the door, then ran into the kitchen and came out swinging a knife at them. I'm a highly decorated veteran with an honorable discharge. No, I have a criminal record because of bad cops and my ex-wife. Story 51. A lot worse has happened to me, but my acquaintances notice I don't smile as much anymore ever since a random stranger pulled and pointed a gun at me. Now, they're always asking why I'm always mad. I have RBF and can't help it, and I'm not usually mad, but I guess that event changed me. I used to smile all the time, but now I draw less attention to myself as possible. I don't know what else to tell them because they don't believe me when I say I'm not mad. Story 52. When I was about 14, I took a huge bong hit, chugged a beer, and let out the smoke. Then my dad called me home to help him move to stuff from his car to an office somewhere. I was so high and nervous. I might still be high and nervous from that day. Story 53. Lotsa Schmidt. All my friends died when I was young, and they keep dying. Boo. No mom. Bad stepmom. Car crashes. Jail time. Lost love. My favorite gal I ever had cheated on me with my friends. Dad's an asshole. Most of my friends are successful. But considering all that, I'm crushing it. Excellent at my craft, builder, and my real craft, music. Got endless friends and a smoking hot girlfriend. Want for nothing. No matter what, it gets better. Just do one small thing per day, and it pays off. Story 54. I was a teenager obsessed with the military. I joined the U.S. Navy at the age of 17. I was then treated horribly by most people there for being different, and I quickly began to hate everyone. My beliefs quickly changed, and I became disgusted by the military and the U.S. government itself. I had to pretend to be suicidal twice to get kicked out because you aren't allowed to quit. Years later, I eventually created RR Regret Joining, and a few years after that, I immigrated to Canada, where I'm now a citizen. Story 55. I was never told no for anything, but instead was always asked, do you think you deserve it? Do you have good enough grades to deserve it? If you really think you do, then we'll get that for you, with an embarrassed face. I would end up withdrawing my request, feeling guilty for asking for something, despite not being a brilliant student. 25 years later today, earning and independent, yet I doubt everything I want in my life, that whether I have done enough to deserve this or that. Story 56. Ex-BF, now in prison for murder. I had never realized that psychopaths really existed, and I still think about the abuse I endured regularly, even though it's been almost 10 years. He drained me financially, cut me off from friends and family, and in the final stages, was even withholding food and water. He drugged me and had his friends partake in making fun of me. I swear, my brain changed completely due to the trauma. I'll never be the person I was before I met him. Story 57. Being homeless for roughly 3-ish years after an abusive marriage, where almost no one relieved me or took my side because I was a man. I can count on one hand the people who were there for me, and none of them were my blood family. The homelessness was a nightmare in itself that I just went on autopilot for a lot of. Being on the streets during the pandemic was a wild experience. I try not to think about those days. I tend to zone out a lot now these days. Story 58. In short, I figured out that my mom is an evil person that has done sick things to people. However, I've never been one to let past scars weigh me down. So I've dedicated my life to being good and helping others to hopefully undo the bad. Story 59. I got mad at my best friend for something silly. 3 days later, he hung himself. He was 12. I had a lot of guilt for a long time. 6 years go by, and then it's found out that he didn't actually kill himself. It was an accident. He was trying to get high off of asphyxiation. People figured it out when another friend of his admitted that he told him about the asphyxiation high and how to do it. But yeah, that sucked. Story 60. Traumatic brain injury. I got hit in head with a 1-in-1 Towson B rock that was launched out of a potato gun. I was on a date with the man I loved. We were driving and it busted right through passenger window and hit my head. Warm blood was pouring out of my head. It hit my right temporal lobe. Coma, metal plate, lost all coping skills in general. Headaches, severe mood swings, personality disorder, depression, anxiety, anger. Everyone hates how I am, including me. Story 61. Being lynched online, being doxxed, and having nudes and data exposed for over 300K people. 4 years have passed, and yet no one was held accountable still. I'm even suing Twitter. Since then, I've developed addictions, lost all my friends or close folks, and have no confidence whatsoever to do anything. All because I talked some Schmidt on Nicki Minaj. With that being said, I hope that piece of radioactive waste and her brain-rotted fan base all dive slowly in boiling oil, then remove and repeat procedure. Story 62, being attacked by 4 pit bulls while holding my 5-year-old daughter above my head. Both of us were bit and brought to the hospital by ambulance. The neighbors heard the commotion and stepped in to help, and I don't think my daughter or I would be here if they didn't. God was looking out for us that day, no doubt. Story 63. Waking up and finding my 6-week-old son had died in his sleep. I will always carry the love I have for him and the grief of losing him. I have another baby now, and the anxiety has been extremely difficult. I think if I hadn't been going to a support group the last 5 years, I would not have been able to do this. Story 64. Dad made up. I was suicidal and slitting my wrists, and I got put in a mental asylum overnight. I showed the doctors my wrists with 0 cuts or scars, but they didn't care. Maybe they just wanted extra money for the hospital. Story 65. Best friend moved about 7 hours away, and within a year and a half, was shot and killed at the age of 13. We did everything together every single day for 2 to 3 years before he moved. He was family, definitely grew up too fast because of that. Showed me how much I took the people around me for granted, not worried about if I would ever see them again. Always assumed I would until that day. Story 66. Being falsely accused of a crime, my ex contacted my job and told them I was raping underage girls. She did this simply to hurt me, and because she didn't understand that I didn't want to be with her anymore. She was hurt and angry because we were breaking up, so she made up this story. I almost lost everything. Lost.